It was just past midnight when I walked into the diner. The kind of place that felt like it had been stuck in time, the neon lights flickering in the rain-soaked streets, offering a false sense of warmth. I was working my usual graveyard shift, the one where the normal world was asleep, and only the oddest souls wandered in. This diner was known for its greasy burgers and stale coffee, but I had gotten used to the strange, often uncomfortable ambience that came with the late hours. What struck me that night, though, was the stillness. It wasn't the kind of quiet that came from being deserted. It was deeper, colder, like the silence was holding its breath. I didn't think much of it at first. I had a shift to survive just like any other night. As I poured a cup of coffee, my mind wandered to the thought of my paycheck, the bills piling up, and the dull weight of life's routine. The bell above the door jingled as a man stepped inside. He was tall, with unkempt dark hair and a thin, drawn face that looked like he hadn't seen a decent night's sleep in months. His clothes were worn, like he had been living out of a suitcase for a while. Dark jacket, faded jeans, boots that had clearly seen better days. He glanced around the diner, scanning the empty booths before his eyes locked on me. "Late night, huh?" he said, his voice rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. "Yeah," I answered, trying to stay polite, but there was something about his presence that made my skin crawl. He slid into the booth closest to the counter, the one by the window where the dim light flickered and cast long, uneasy shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something. The air felt charged, but there was no one else around. Just me, the man, and the flickering neon. I tried to shrug off the unease and turned my attention to the grill. It was just me and him now, in a quiet, deserted diner. But I couldn't focus. Something wasn't right. I just had to figure out what it was before it was too late. The man didn't order anything at first. He just sat there, staring at the half-empty mug of coffee I had placed in front of him. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the surface of the table, and I noticed the slight tremor in his hands. It was subtle but unsettling, almost like he couldn't stop the nervous energy building inside him. I wiped down the counter, trying to look busy, but my mind kept drifting back to him. I didn't know why I felt so uneasy. Maybe it was just his presence or the way he was watching me. His eyes were dark, almost too dark, like they hadn't seen the sun in years. Then finally he spoke. "You know, this place is always open, right?" I glanced up at him, and his gaze was locked on me, intense and unblinking. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual. "It's the night shift. Someone has to be here." He smiled then, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was something off about it, a kind of coldness that made my heart beat a little faster. "You ever wonder who's really watching?" he asked, his voice lowering like he was telling me a secret. I felt my blood run cold. The way he said it, like there was more to the question. "Watching who?" I asked, but it came out more like a reflex, an instinct to cover up my unease. "The people who come in," he said, his smile widening slightly. "I mean, you're working the night shift, right? Do you ever wonder who's watching you?" I froze for a moment. My mind was racing. Was he talking about something else? Or was he just some random guy with strange thoughts? I forced myself to keep it together. "I don't know what you mean. It's just a job." His eyes never left mine, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. All I could focus on was the strange tension in the air, the feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. He leaned back in the booth and folded his arms across his chest. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Not yet, anyway." Before I could ask what he meant, the diner door creaked open again. A gust of cold air swept inside, making the dim light above flicker. I turned to see a woman walk in, drenched from the rain. She looked different somehow. Her face was pale, too pale, and her clothes were soaked through. But the thing that made me shiver was the look in her eyes. Empty, like there was nothing inside her. The man's eyes flicked to her, and his lips curled into a strange smile. It was the kind of smile you give when you know something others don't. The woman didn't say anything, just walked to the furthest booth and sat down, staring straight ahead, not once looking at either of us. My pulse quickened, and for the first time that night, I felt like I wasn't alone in the diner. Not in the way I usually did, at least. Something was happening here. Something that was beyond just a late-night shift. I tried to ignore the woman in the booth, but every time I glanced at her, it felt like she was watching me. Her eyes, those empty, lifeless eyes, stayed locked on me, and it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. The man in the corner was still watching me, his gaze now a little more knowing, like he could read my every thought. I couldn't focus. The diner was becoming more than just a quiet, empty space. It felt like it was pulsing with an unseen presence. And then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the reflection of the woman in the glass, but it was wrong. The image was distorted, blurry, like it wasn't quite her. Before I could fully process it, the man spoke again, his voice low, almost a whisper. "She's not really here, you know." I blinked, turning to face him. His eyes were still locked on the woman. There was a hint of something dark in his voice, something I couldn't place. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "She's not here." He repeated it like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Not really. Neither of them are." I looked over at the woman again, and now my skin was crawling. The way she was staring, motionless, gave me the feeling that I was being watched not just by her, but by something else. Something in the shadows. Something that shouldn't be there. My heart began to race. The diner suddenly felt like a trap, a cage closing in on me. I turned back to the man. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. "What do you want?" He didn't respond immediately. He just stared at me, those dark eyes gleaming with some kind of twisted amusement. Then he leaned in, so close that his breath brushed against my ear, and whispered, "You should have left when you had the chance. You're already too deep now." I froze. The words hung in the air like a curse, and I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. The air in the diner was thick, like I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in on me, and I realized we were not alone here anymore. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The lights flickered again, and I saw the woman stand up. Slowly, too slowly. Her head turned toward me with an unnatural jerk, like she was moved by strings, and for the first time, I saw it. Her smile wasn't human. It was wide, too wide, stretching unnaturally across her face. Her teeth, jagged and sharp, gleamed in the dim light. The sound of her bones cracking as she moved made my stomach churn. Before I could react, she began to walk toward me. The man chuckled softly from the booth, his eyes never leaving the woman. "You'll never be the same again," he said, his tone almost triumphant. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as the woman got closer. The diner suddenly felt like a suffocating void. I could barely move, my muscles locking up in fear. It was like time itself had slowed, and all I could do was stare at her as she approached. And then, everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, everything felt wrong. The air was thicker, colder. The usual hum of the diner's old refrigerator and the soft clink of silverware had vanished. It was as if time had stopped. The only thing I could hear was my breath, shallow and quick, and the faint sound of something moving, slowly. I opened my eyes, but the diner I knew was gone. The neon sign outside was dead, its flicker replaced by a low, constant buzzing. The lights inside were dim, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to stretch across the walls. I couldn't remember when I had lost consciousness, but when I tried to sit up, a sharp pain shot through my chest, like someone had pressed a heavy weight on me. I pushed myself up slowly, my head spinning, trying to make sense of where I was. The woman, the thing, was gone, but the man was still there, sitting in the booth, watching me. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, a predatory gleam that sent a jolt of panic through my body. I felt trapped. I knew I couldn't just walk out the door. Something was keeping me here. "You're awake," he said, his voice deep and resonant, like the sound of a distant thunderstorm. I could barely find the words. My throat was dry, and it took all my strength to ask, What? What is this? He smiled again, that same cold, knowing smile. This is where they come. This is where they wait. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. And you're one of them now. The room felt suffocating, and I could barely breathe. The diner was darker now, darker than it should have been for the middle of the night. The walls were closing in, and I felt someone, watching me from every corner. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice trembling. You will. He spoke as if he had all the time in the world. In time, you'll see them too. You'll hear them. They'll come for you, just like they came for me. The thought of being trapped here, in this place with them, made my stomach churn. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My legs felt heavy, like they were made of stone. And then I heard it, a low growl, a scraping sound, like claws dragging across metal. My heart stopped. The air turned even colder, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked around, but I couldn't see anything. No movement, no shapes, but I felt them. I could feel them closing in, pressing in from the edges of my vision, from the darkness that swallowed up the corners of the diner. Suddenly, the man's voice cut through the silence. They won't stop until they have you, he said, standing up from his booth, his movements smooth, unervingly graceful. Just like they had me. I tried to speak, but my throat was tight, and the words wouldn't come. He tilted his head, his eyes dark and hollow. They always want something you'll never get back. I turned to look out the window, but there was nothing but inky blackness. The diner had changed. The streetlights outside had gone out, leaving only the eerie glow from the diner's broken sign. Then I saw her, the woman, the thing. She was standing across the room, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her mouth was stretched into a grin again, and her eyes locked onto mine with that same chilling emptiness. She wasn't alone. Behind her, in the dark, I could see shadows moving. Shadows with shapes humanoid but wrong. Their limbs were twisted, their bodies long and contorted. They moved in unnatural jerks, dragging their limbs like they had forgotten how to walk properly. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The man's voice echoed in my head. Welcome to the other side, he said, where you never leave. Couldn't breathe. The shadows, those twisted shapes behind the woman, were moving closer. They were crawling across the floor, their limbs scraping against the tiles in a way that felt wrong. The woman's grin widened as she took a step forward, but her feet didn't seem to touch the ground, as though she was floating just above it. She wasn't walking. She was gliding. I scrambled back from the counter, my back hitting the grill, but it didn't matter. There was nowhere to go. The diner felt like it had become a prison, the walls closing in on me with every second. The door was still there, but it might as well have been 1,000 miles away. I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my ears, loud and frantic, but the silence around me pressed in like a vice. You don't understand, do you? The man's voice, smooth and calm, cut through the panic in my chest. He was standing right behind me now, close enough that I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. You're already one of them. You always were. I turned to face him, my legs shaking beneath me, but his face was different now. The familiar hollow look in his eyes was gone, replaced by something darker. His mouth was stretched into a grin too wide, his teeth jagged and sharp, and his skin was wrong. It was pale, too pale, and his veins were visible beneath the surface, crawling across his face like dark threads. You're part of the diner now, he continued, his voice dripping with malicious amusement. We all are. We were all chosen. And once you're chosen, there's no escape. I felt my pulse quicken. Couldn't be real. I couldn't be trapped in some nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. But the shadows were getting closer. They had stopped crawling now and were standing, towering, around me. Their features were impossible to make out, their faces hidden in the darkness. But their presence was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. I looked to the woman, her eyes never leaving mine, her grin still stretched unnaturally wide. She was getting closer too. I could hear her bones creaking with every movement. Every step she took sounded louder, more deliberate. Her feet didn't make a sound on the floor, but I could hear the dragging noise from behind her as the other shadows advanced. "You know," the man's voice whispered again, close to my ear, "there's no point in running. Not from this place. Not from them." I swallowed hard, trying to force the words out of my mouth. "What are they?" His grin twisted further. "Hungry. Always hungry. They come for anyone who gets too close to the diner. And now they'll never let you go. You're theirs." The woman stopped directly in front of me, and the shadows gathered around us, closing in. I could hear them breathing now, slow, raspy, labored breaths that seemed to echo all around me. But there was no escape. I knew that now. There was nowhere to run. The air grew colder still, and the flickering lights above us stuttered one last time, plunging us into almost total darkness. All I could make out was the pale outline of the woman's face, the gleaming white teeth, and the endless abyss of her empty eyes staring into mine. And then, she opened her mouth. A low, guttural sound filled the air, something between a growl and a scream. I felt my chest tighten as though something were clawing at my insides. The shadows surged forward, their forms solidifying, their limbs stretching, reaching for me. I tried to move, but it was like my body was frozen in place. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. All I could do was watch as they crowded around me, their twisted figures closing in, the air thick with their presence. But just as they were about to reach out and touch me, everything stopped. The diner blinked. It was like everything had paused in mid-motion. The shadows, the woman, the man, they were all still, frozen in time. And for a moment, I thought I had escaped, that maybe this was just some twisted hallucination. But then I saw something in the corner of my eye. A figure. A man standing in the doorway. He was tall, dressed in a suit, and the instant I saw him, I knew he wasn't one of them. He wasn't like the shadows. He walked slowly toward me, his eyes never leaving mine. But as he stepped closer, the shadows began to stir again, their movements sharp and jerky, like they were waking from a long sleep. "You don't belong here," the man in the suit said quietly. "I'm here to take you out." But I knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing about this place was simple. The man in the suit moved slowly toward me, his steps steady and deliberate, cutting through the thick silence that had fallen over the diner. His presence felt different, not like the others. There was no hunger in his eyes, no malice. But the longer I stared at him, the more I felt a strange pull. He wasn't an ordinary man. He was something else, something far beyond what I could understand. The shadows, those grotesque, twisted figures, moved restlessly as he approached, as if afraid of him. They shrank back, their eyes now watching him instead of me. The woman, still frozen in place with her wide grin and hollow eyes, tilted her head as he got closer, but she didn't move. You're here to save me?" I asked, my voice trembling. I couldn't help myself. After everything I had just seen, the shadows, the woman, the man, he was the only thing that felt like a tether to reality. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver object. It was a key, old, weathered, but perfectly ordinary. "Not save you," he said, his voice low yet strangely calm. "I'm here to free you." I took a step back. "Free me? From what?" He didn't answer, but his eyes flicked over to the man in the booth, who was still watching me, his grin stretching further, if that was even possible. "There are things you don't understand," the man in the booth said, his voice dripping with malicious amusement. "Things that cannot be undone. You think you can just walk away from this? From them?" I felt the air grow heavier, thicker, and I instinctively reached out to the man in the suit for some sort of reassurance. But he held up a hand. "Don't listen to him," he said. "That's exactly what they want. For you to think you're trapped." I glanced around the diner. It was the same place. The greasy counter, the flickering neon outside, the dusty booths. But nothing felt the same anymore. The shadows had a presence now, a weight that hung in the air, like they were always there, watching, waiting. The woman in the booth hadn't moved. her grin still wide, too wide, as though the corners of her mouth could stretch to the back of her head. "Get out of here," I urged him, fear gripping me. "You don't understand. There's no way out of this place. You don't know what's waiting." He didn't flinch. His eyes met mine, calm and steady. "That's the first thing you need to understand," he said quietly. "You've already made the choice. This place, it's a reflection of you, of the choices you've made, the things you've seen. But there's a way out, a real way, but it means you have to face them. You have to stop running." I felt a rush of panic. "But I can't," I choked out. "I can't face them. Can't. Not again." The shadows behind me stirred, their limbs twitching as they seemed to close in once more. The woman's laughter echoed in my ears. I could feel their cold breath, could hear their hissing whispers as they inched closer. The diner, this place, was becoming a nightmare. A place that had become more than just walls and lights. A place that had a life of its own. "You have to face them," the man in the suit repeated, this time with a firmness that made my insides freeze. "There's no way forward if you don't. You're already part of the cycle, part of this world, but you have to make the choice to leave it behind." The woman's eyes snapped to him, and her grin grew wider. Her movements were unnaturally smooth now, and I could feel her gaze bore into me like a physical force, trying to pull me in. Suddenly, the man in the suit raised the key in his hand and placed it in the air. The shadows recoiled, pulling back from the light that radiated from it. The diner began to warp around us, the walls stretching and contracting as if they were breathing. The man in the suit was holding something back, something that wanted to consume me, to drag me into the same hellish existence as the others. The woman's laughter reached a fever pitch, but the man in the suit remained unshaken. "You have to choose now. Stay and you become like them, or take the key, face what's coming, and leave. Forever." The air in the diner was thick with tension. I felt the weight of it pressing on me from all sides, and as I turned toward the door, I saw the shadows, the twisted creatures, the woman, the man, standing still, waiting, as though they were watching to see what I would do. I could feel the key in my hand now, a cold weight that seemed to hum with some strange energy. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. This was it. I had to make the choice. I had to face it. But no matter what I decided, I knew one thing for certain. I would never be the same again. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my fingers cold around the key, my heart pounding in my chest like it might explode. The shadows were closing in, but I could feel the man in the suit's presence, steady, unwavering, like a lifeline, pulling me toward some distant, unreachable shore. The woman in the booth, the twisted creatures lurking in the corners of my vision, the man with the grinning face. All of them waited, watching, but I knew now they weren't the ones in control. It was me. I had been running for too long. From the moment I'd walked into that diner, I had been on the edge of something I couldn't comprehend, something that had been waiting for me. The shadows, the grinning woman, even the man in the booth, they were all part of the same thing, the same cycle, the same prison. But I was alive and I still had the power to make a choice. I held the key tighter. "What happens if I take it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, but there was an edge of certainty in it now. The man in the suit didn't flinch. He simply looked at me, as though he had been waiting for me to ask that question. "You'll leave this place. You'll never come back. But leaving won't be easy. There are things in this world, things that feed on fear, on confusion. You'll have to face them. You'll have to face yourself." The woman in the booth snarled, and the shadows hissed, their forms becoming more distinct in the dim light, their claws reaching out toward me. "You can't escape, you know," the man in the booth called, his voice sharp and mocking. "Once you're here, you're theirs. You're part of the diner, part of the hunger." The darkness around us thickened, swirling and writhing like it had a mind of its own. But the key in my hand hummed again, stronger this time, and I felt the air around me shift. The man in the suit wasn't lying. This was my chance. If I chose to leave, I would break the cycle. My pulse raced. Every inch of me screamed to stay, to keep my head down and pretend it wasn't happening. But deep down, I knew I had to face what was coming. I had to make the choice to end it, once and for all. I took one final, steadying breath and walked toward the door. The woman lunged at me, but the key flared in my hand, sending a pulse of light through the diner. The shadows screeched, pulling back as if they were burned. The woman's expression twisted in pain, but I didn't look back. Couldn't. I pushed open the door. The world outside was different. The rain had stopped, and the streets were quiet, empty. The diner was behind me now, its neon sign flickering one last time before the darkness consumed it entirely. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know what was out there waiting for me, but I had made my choice. I had chosen to face whatever came, to fight whatever darkness tried to pull me back. I was free, but it wasn't just the diner I was leaving behind. It was everything it represented. I had chosen to break the cycle, and as I walked into the night, I knew that I would never look back. The diner was gone, but it would always be with me,